Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is on my large-scale TBR that I've been chipping away at. It is a book about a young girl with special abilities and who is viewed as largely intelligent. I am referring to Matilda by Roald Dahl, which was published in 1988. For those who don't know, I've talked about Roald Dahl on this channel before, specifically with his short story, The Hitchhiker, and you can go find out more about my thoughts specifically on him in that video. But for those who don't know, he was I think he's still alive. He might be. No, he's not. He was a writer who lived throughout the 1900s, and he wrote quite a bit of children's fiction, such as Matilda, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach. I've read James and the Giant Peach, not for this channel, but in the past, and it was pretty good. And a lot of the themes that Roald Dahl talks about are that of magic and sort of folklore, emphasizing a child's perspective and the fact that maybe authority figures don't know what they're talking about at times, that they might not know what's best for the children, which you see especially in the book that I'm going to talk about today. He was, also a problematic author and had a lot of strange beliefs about that, which I've covered in another video, but I thought I'd just, mention that again. So without further ado, let's talk about Matilda. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Matilda focuses, of course, on Matilda Wormwood, an intelligent young girl who is, she shows intelligence at a very young age, like 5 years old, going to the library to read on her own and becoming proficient with reading as well as mathematics. But she unfortunately has nasty parents who don't, motivate her or inspire or indulge her so that she becomes even brighter. They seem to be at odds with Matilda. And they discourage her from going to the library because reading is for nerds and you can't possibly gain any real knowledge out of a book. And she begins, as she gets a little bit older, she shows frustrations with her parents, specifically by supergluing her father's hat on his head after he reveals that he cheats people out of their money when he sells them cars. And she also torments her parents by making them think that there's a ghost in the house. And this continues for a little while before eventually the parents just send Matilda to school, where she meets Miss Honey. Miss Honey is a very nice teacher, described as very beautiful, and she instantly recognizes that Matilda is very intelligent and tries to offer her more books and opportunities to learn more in order to get her, sort of challenge her and fuel her growth. Meanwhile, Miss Honey tries to get Matilda promoted or sent to a higher grade where she'll face a real challenge, and she takes this to Miss Trunchbull, who is the school headmistress. Trunchbull is a terrible woman, described as ugly and kind of militaristic, and she was told by Matilda's father that she wasn't to be trusted, so she doesn't believe Miss Honey when she tries to point out that Matilda is intelligent. And Miss Honey goes to Matilda's parents, and they don't believe that Miss Honey when she tells them what's happening with Matilda either. And they seem to have a bit of a confrontational relationship there. Later at school, Miss Trunchbull forces a student named Bruce Bogtrotter, which is a fabulous last name, to eat a chocolate cake after he eats her private cake that she was gonna eat that and left in the kitchen. It's hard for him to do at first, but he eventually powers through, becomes somewhat of a rebel figure to his fellow students. One day while Trunchbull is sort of teaching Miss Honey's class, Matilda becomes frustrated with Miss Trunchbull and magically knocks over a glass of water that contained a newt onto Miss Trunchbull and causes her to flee the class. Afterwards, Matilda tells Miss Honey what happened and demonstrates some more magic that she can do to her. And Miss Honey is unsure what this means and is worried that this could be, possibly a bad form of magic. She just wants to learn more. So she invites Matilda to her cabin to talk with her and figure out what's going on, because she's certain that her parents, Matilda's parents, would not believe her if she told her. And at Miss Honey's cabin, Matilda sees that Miss Honey is very poor because she's been giving money to her aunt, who is a terrible human being who, after raising Miss Honey, after Miss Honey's parents died, decided that she was going to ask for all that money back that she gave to Miss Honey over the years for food and shelter and whatnot. And she finds out that the aunt is just this terrible person who who might have killed Miss Honey's dad, and who seems to be withholding Miss Honey's inheritance for the time being. And we find out that Miss Honey's aunt is in fact Miss Trunchbull. And Miss Honey says she doesn't want Matilda to do anything with this information, but she also points out that she probably kind of told Matilda for a reason after finding out about her magical abilities. Later at school, while Miss Trunchbull is teaching the class, Matilda uses her magic to make writing appear on the chalkboard that basically makes it look like Miss Honey's father, Magnus, is reaching out from beyond the grave to lay blame on Trunchbull for his death and to yell at Trunchbull to give Miss Honey her inheritance back. Trunchbull passes out and then flees when she gets back up, and later it's revealed that Miss Honey is given the inheritance and everything seems to be working out for her. However, Matilda actually loses her powers in the process, which Miss Honey says is probably related to the fact that she's now been pushed up a couple grades and has an actual challenge to deal with, whereas before she was receiving very little challenge. Matilda's parents also flee the country because it turns out her father was in league with criminals in town to sell stolen cars. But Miss Honey ends up adopting Matilda with Matilda's father's consent. The story ends, Matilda and Miss Honey embrace, so kind of a happier ending there. In terms of analysis, Roald Dahl does give us a fair bit to think about with this story. I know this is a children's story meant for middle grade children, but there's two things there. One, that doesn't mean there aren't deeper themes worth exploring in middle grade literature, but also that means we should definitely pay close attention to what themes are being espoused, because you never know what authors are trying to pass on to teenagers, preteens, young children. We should always, take a closer look at those types of stories, just to get an idea of that. And it seems like one idea that Roald Dahl is talking about here is that of ugliness. He's sort of saying that bad people look bad, and he's not really saying like ugly people are ugly. He's more saying that people who do bad things are hideous inside, and their outsides eventually catch up to match with them. Describes Matilda's parents as kind of gross looking ratty kind of people, especially Matilda's father, who is selling stolen cars, as we learn later in the story, and he generally just tries to cheat people out of money as much as possible, whether it be by rigging up the cars so it looks like they don't have as much mileage as they actually do, or just like putting sand or dust or whatever into the cars to make it look like they're more operational than they are, and then dodging those customers later when they come back and say, hey, this car broke down like a couple days after I bought it. What are you going to do to help me? And all Matilda's father seems to care about is greed, and he looks ugly as a result. But this is especially true for Miss Trunchbull, who is described as tubby and misshapen, and really gross. Even the illustrations in the book point her out as being like this sort of monster of a woman. and she's dressed in militaristic clothing, someone you wouldn't want to be around. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you. Her face, I'm afraid, was neither a thing of beauty nor a joy forever. She had an obstinate chin, a cruel mouth, and small arrogant eyes, and as for her clothes, they were, to say the least, extremely odd. She always had on a brown cotton smock, which was pinched in around the waist with a wide leather belt. The belt was fastened in front with an enormous silver buckle, which you can see there with the description. Like she clearly doesn't look that good, and the clothes that she are wearing, like you see the word brown cotton smock, which, you know, that's a pretty unusual outfit. And so her appearance as it is inside is like outside, she's just as ugly. Like there's a hideousness of immorality where if you're a bad person who does bad things, whether it be steal or beat up children or withhold inheritance, among many other things, you're not going to be a very good looking person. And I think that's a very important message for Roald Dahl to be passing out there, that, you know, like, if you're a bad person, people aren't going to like you. People aren't going to talk that great about you. And you see a comparison here with Miss Honey, who's described as very beautiful, who's described as pleasant to be around, as caring, as kind. She exudes warmth and empathy, especially towards Matilda, and you see that around her students as well. She wants all of her students to succeed, and so Roald Dahl's kind of making a comparison, showing, you know, the people who'd be reading this, like, oh, you'd probably want to be more like Miss Honey than you would Roald Dahl, because, you know, if you're ugly on the inside, you're going to end up ugly on the outside as well, which is an interesting message to spread there. And then Roald Dahl also like he focuses heavily on, somewhat heavily on Matilda's magic, but makes it an interesting point of discussion here. Like, she has amazing abilities as part of her many talents. She's very intelligent. She's competent in math. She can read books that, you know, are way above her age range, such as Dickens and Shakespeare and many other British authors, which I noticed on the list that Roald Dahl included. It was mainly British authors, which I thought was a funny point there. But in addition to this, she can apparently use telepathic abilities, and who knows what else she is capable of doing. But the question of this that I think Roald Dahl poses, but never fully answers, is what is the source of this magic? Why does she have this ability? It ultimately doesn't matter in terms of story, but I do think it's an interesting question to ask. Miss Honey would argue that this is because she lacks a challenge. Like, she's in a class where she's not mentally stimulated, so her brain has a lot more energy to you know, do weird and wild things. Which is a valid point. But I think, like, if further in life, in say high school or something, she might regain those abilities if that were the case. So, you know, it would make for an interesting sequel. But I think this is more to do with really the representative of her frustration with adults, with her being told that she's too small, too insignificant, that she doesn't matter, that her interests don't matter, and you see that in the story when Trunchbull is telling her that she's too small. When she's yelling at her and accusing her of doing bad things in the class, she just gets really angry and then flips over the water with the Nuda onto Miss Trunchbull. And it's that seems to be the origin. The reason for her powers is her sort of lashing out at an adult world that doesn't respect or understand her. And I think that's even more highlighted in the movie, if you've seen the Matilda movie, because a lot of the power seems to come from her frustration with her parents. There's a scene in the movie where where Matilda is arguing with her father, and he's like, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm big, you're small, other things that he says there. And that's that I think that gets at the frustrations that lead to the magic. And I know the movie isn't relevant as we're talking to the book, but the ideas and the themes are built upon to, you know, fill out and make the movie more compelling in a way. So it's always worth looking at movie adaptations from time to time. And I think that's where the power seems to come from, which is very interesting. But it's also interesting that Miss Honey chooses to, rely on Matilda in this moment. She learns that this girl has magical abilities, and it seems like her first action, besides, working it out if she actually has these powers, or, taking her to a place where she can study it more, is to ask her, can you help me with my problem here? She says like, oh, I don't want you to help me with my inheritance problem. But she also says like, this was probably the reason I brought you here, because I secretly hoped you could help me with this. So, and I know that's not the point. I know Roald Dahl isn't going that in depth, but it seems like Miss Honey is using Matilda in the same way, like she's getting one over this small child, using her as the other adults would use her to feel significant about themselves. It always struck me as weird, especially in the movie, which like Matilda or like Miss Honey seems to like just go in that direction already, and seems to see a girl with magical abilities is like, how can I use this to benefit me? That's probably not what Roald Dahl was intending, but that's there. It's very strange. I'm pretty sure like most people reading this wouldn't get that, but for me that kind of sticks out as a very unusual part of the book. And then, as I mentioned before, Roald Dahl frequently talks about how authority figures don't know best, and you see that here. Like Matilda, like for someone like Matilda, like giving her more books, like intellectually challenging her is for the best, but like her parents and Trunchbull are like, no, we absolutely shouldn't do that. And then we also see like Trunchbull throwing children around and being very rude and mean to them, and that's not how you're supposed to treat children. Like the adults in the situation clearly don't have the children's best interest at heart. And maybe Roald Dahl is poking fun at the educational in the system, but he does have a lot of points that, often is the case. We typically bully or discourage children from pursuing certain avenues because it's not what adults think are good or right. And so we end up like maybe not helping them out the best that we can. And that's an important message to send out, because, when children grow up, they're going to, if we tell them to respect authority figures, then like they're going to be trusting authority figures who might not have their best interest at heart. And so it's always good to challenge the system and ask questions, which Roald Dahl is pointing children in that direction for. And then, there's also the idea that it's important to support someone's growth. In this case, Miss Honey supports Matilda's growth, which is very beautiful, as opposed to Trunchbull or her parents, who don't do that. And so, like if you see someone who is trying to be better, help them out a little bit. It's a very positive message to be sending out. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Matilda by Roald Dahl. A pretty solid book, not as good as I was hoping it to be, but still pretty good. I was expecting a little bit more, and it's clear that the movie adaptation added a little bit more, which furthered the themes and helped it really stand out. It made it like a classic that we still talk about today. But still a very solid book that is a wonderful addition to the Roald Dahl canon of challenging the status quo as children books, and definitely worth pursuing. Either if you're an adult, just finding this if you haven't read it before, or if you're a child, and you're looking for something to read, in which case get back to school, young person, or just go out and seek this one if you haven't read it before. If you read it before, though, comment below. Let's have a discussion about this book. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about Matilda or Roald Dahl if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and magical ability travels. Farewell.